All right, we're going to get started again here. For our live stream viewers at home, just wanted to welcome everybody back to Two Beers Brewing here in Seattle, Washington. To my left is actually the founder of Two Beers, Joel. Give a big nod to the camera and everyone here.
Thanks
Joel,
for coming.
thank you so much for hosting us. I'm going to move this. It's your tiny ears again.
I know, world's smallest ears.
Thank you so much for hosting us. This is great. I know we have a full house here and some folks standing in the back, so this is awesome. Kendall Jones, just to Joel's left, is a man who knows 1,000 times more about beer than I will ever know, I think. He's been covering the beer business here in Washington State for 20-plus years, and knows a ton about the history of beer in Seattle, so he's going to provide some great insight and wisdom this evening. And Ryan Hilliard is the co-founder of Hilliard's Beer, one of the more sleeker designed cans I've seen in a while, and certainly making some awesome beer. So how about a round of applause for these guys? So over the next 30-35 minutes, we're going to sort of examine the environment for craft beer in Seattle. We'll look at the cultural factors as well as some of the civic factors that help promote craft beer here in the state of Washington. The panelists are going to talk about some of the struggles of operating a small brewery business in Seattle and the ways in which craft brewery owners can rally the support of some of the key city planning officials to really help bolster the growth of craft here in Seattle. I mentioned some of the Nielsen numbers earlier, but again, a lot of this discussion, what we're going to try to do is compare and contrast some markets to your neighbor in Portland, which does such a great job with craft, and the Pacific Northwest in general is just awesome for craft beer. But from an outsider's perspective, you tend to hear a lot more about Portland, and you tend to see a lot more people planning trips to go to Portland. And while Seattle does have such a rich history of beer and a lot of breweries, it's not talked about quite as much. So kind of wanted to examine that. Let's start by discussing some of the current, what the current consumer appetite is in Seattle for craft beer. And Joel, I'm sure you can speak to this. What are people looking for in Seattle in terms of craft beers?
So in general, what I've noticed, I've had Two Beers Brewing for just shy of 6 years now. And over the last 6 years, some certain things have changed and some certain things have stayed the same. One of the things that has stayed the same in Seattle is the average Seattleite, I think when they go into a bar, they look for a good beer, which is different than some other cities around the country. Seattleites will go in and be like, all right, I'm looking for a good IPA. Just give me the IPA that's on tap. The next category down from that, they kind of look at geography. Some people really, really care about local. Others just care that it's a good beer. And so that's kind of stayed the same. Good beers have kind of come and gone in many ways because the other thing Seattleites look for is what's new. What just came to town? What's rotating? What's a seasonal? What's limited edition? What's something I can only get here that I can't get anywhere else? So those are the two things I've noticed.
Kendall, how about some of the things that you've noticed covering the Seattle beer business for a while?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things that's happened is, although we still have an amazing appetite for IPA, that people are getting into sour beers and the really strongly barrel-aged beers, the bourbon beers and stuff, is really kind of interesting from a consumer standpoint because we're always talking about these gateway beers that introduce new people into craft beer. But us beer geeks who've been drinking good beer for a long time, our palate is changing in ways that we don't know. I think our collective palate grew from like the early 90s when we were drinking lots of amber to maybe the late 90s when we were drinking more pale ale, and now we're IPA crazy around here. And we're starting to change even into more different directions. And I think barrel-aged beers, Belgian-style beers, a little bit funkier flavored beers, I think, are what's going to be coming along. And it's amazing that if you talk to a pub owner and you say, what kind of beer is selling really well in here this week? If you go to the Beverage Place pub, for instance, and ask them what's selling really well this week, it's a Saison Brett from Logston Brewing in Oregon. And that's kind of a crazy beer compared to to a typical IPA or a typical pale ale. So I think our palate is definitely evolving.
Interesting. And then Ryan, how about some of the trends you're noticing here in Seattle?
Well, being the youngster of the crowd here, I don't have a whole lot to say on what I've noticed changing. I only notice what we have right now and what kind of hits well and what goes well. So, anything? Hello. I killed it. Hello. Okay, now here we go. Okay, got the mic on. Being the youngster of the crowd here, we've only been open for about a year and a half, so I don't know that there's a whole lot that I can say of what I've seen change. We got onto the market with an odd beer. We do a Saison in a can, and we don't do an IPA, so we kind of were ignoring what the market was doing in the beginning, and that hasn't changed a whole lot for us. So
Your success is proving my point.
well, thank you.
No IPA for you.
No IPA. We don't do an IPA.
Why? Any particular reason why?
There are a lot of IPAs out there. A lot of people doing different versions of it. I don't know what we have to offer in that category. Nobody walks into a bar and says, well, why don't you have a I don't know, Schwartz beer from this brewery? Why don't they do a Schwartz beer? I mean, an IPA is one style of beer. There's a lot of different beers out there, a lot of different styles that people can do and do variations of and do very well. But it seems like there's a market fixation on the IPA, and I think we can.
For good reason, it sells really well.
Well, it does. It does.
Yeah.
But you're seeing just as a good amount of success with Saisons and other styles.
Yeah. I think we're doing quite well. I mean, we have sort of a contrarian take on how we're hitting the market and how we're doing things, so it doesn't really, it doesn't affect us a whole lot.
So I want to pose a question to Kendall, being the elder statesman here on the panel, having such a deep history and knowledge of Seattle. How have you seen the market change over the last 10 or 15 years? I mean, there's some really established breweries here, Red Hook out in Woodinville, Pike, Pyramid. I mean, these are breweries that have been around for a while. What's changed? Yeah,
They're in the house tonight, so let's mention Diamond Knot.
Diamond Knot. Sure. What's changing now that a lot of these new folks like Ryan are cropping up, or Joel in the last 5 years, and starting to make their mark?
Well, I think that without speaking too much about like what's actually happening in terms of the industry and who's showing up and opening breweries, but speaking more about the consumers, that the demographic of the craft beer geek is changing. You go back 10 years ago, and you had the beer drinkers were these hardcore guys that were really into the beer. They wanted to go to beer festivals so they could talk to the brewer, and they wanted to know what kind of hops you used in this IPA. We're getting to where craft beer is becoming much more mainstream, and that's really kind of taken off some of the hardcore beer geeks, the old schoolers. But to me, I look at it and I say, that's what I've always wanted. I've always wanted the beer that I love to become more popular and become more mainstream, and we're slowly getting there. And that's a big change. And I also think it's getting younger. The beer festivals used to be filled with people who were 35 years old and older, and that's totally changing now. As younger people, or people who've basically known craft beer all their life, since they started drinking beer, there's always been Manny's Pale Ale ever since. I joke about it and I say, when I walked into a bar for the first time, don't want to date myself, but I walked into a bar for the first time and it was like I had my choice of draft beer, Michelob, or Bud Light. Nowadays, guys who are 30 years old can literally say, first time I walked into a bar, there was Manny's Pale Ale. That's the first beer that I ordered in a bar. And that's changing. That's changing people's perceptions. There's people out there, younger people out there who've never known anything but good beer.
Right, and you think that's becoming more of the standard here in Seattle rather than the exception to the rule?
I think I'm hoping that it is. I think here in Seattle that's probably true, but maybe away from the city it's not quite as true. There's still a lot of yellow beer drinkers away from the city, but here in the city, kids that are going to the University of Washington right now are going down to the Ave and they're going into Big Time Brewery and they're killing that stuff. And when Big Time Brewery opened back in the 90s, Big Time Brewery was full of us people who were coming in from all around the area to go to a good brew pub.
So more is better, is what you're saying, essentially.
I think more is better.
Right. So now that we know a little bit about what's happening in Seattle and sort of have a reference point, the focus of this conversation really is about sort of the struggles of owning a brewery in Seattle. And Joel, I know when we spoke, you touched on it a little bit. Has Seattle really been receptive to craft beer like the neighbor in Portland has been so receptive to craft beer and making it a sort of a fabric of the community?
I'd say I would define Seattle as a city indifferent toward craft beer. They don't really lean one way hard against, and they don't really do much for craft beer. The most interactions I have with the city are from legislation, taxation, and permit standpoints, all of which end up costing me money. And so I can tend to look at that as a negative thing, like I got to get a permit to do this, and I got to pay these taxes, and I got to do that. On the flip side of thing, what I would love to see from the city is a little more interaction with the community and an understanding. There's a growing sense of, there's growing data that proves that when a craft brewery moves into a community, it kind of becomes the hub of that community. My sister lives in a small suburb in Chicago. A little tiny nano brewery moved in on Main Street. They had 75% vacation, or the buildings on the Main Street were vacated. Within the brewery being there for 2 years, 100% capacity on Main Street, the old school downtown. And so there's a growing understanding of that, which I don't think Seattle has quite acknowledged yet.
So if you were to ask a city, a city planning official, something that you would need as a small business owner to help make that more of something that they pay attention to, I mean, what are you really looking for from them? Is it tax breaks? Is it easier permitting laws? What's really, in your point of view, going to help drive the success of craft beer in Seattle and be, like you said, like in Chicago, more of a part of the community?
I'd say it could be a general, what I would love for Seattle to do is kind of a general marketing campaign with the moniker local, local, local. Bring it beyond craft beer, kind of make it a larger thing where there's a much more awareness to, I as a business, I try to use local suppliers because I understand that if I spend $1 at another soda business, it's going to pay for that guy's family to go to college or whatever. Like that dollar is going to get spent in the community 2, 3, 4, 5 more times. Whereas if I use like a supplier overseas, it's different, right? The money leaves the country. And so if the city could really do some active campaigning to do some advertising or marketing or understanding around keeping things local, keeping your dollar local would be a fantastic start.
Yeah, Ryan, as another brewery owner, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my interaction with the city has been more on a regulatory side of it, and like Joel said, they're kind of indifferent. You're just another business. I had the same sort of experience where the street that we moved in on and started our brewery was, mostly vacant when we got in there, except for a very large galvanizing company. It's fully leased up though now. There is not a vacant, storefront on the whole street, and I think that's pretty cool. Awesome. And it's brought a lot more people down to the brewery to drink our beer and to be down there on weekends, and kind of extended, the area of what, where people go. In our community, and I think Ballard's pretty unique where we are. The community where we are is in that we have had a lot of vacancy and have had a lot of industrial businesses, and it is a great spot for breweries because all of that backs right up to a very, very vibrant bar and restaurant scene right over on Ballard Ave, and so we're close to that. And as Joel can probably attest, boy, there's nothing like having a tap room to help your bottom line.
I'm hearing a lot of indifference in terms of the city's thoughts on craft beer. Kendall, what's Seattle's take on craft beer? Do they want craft beer to be what the city's known for? There's a lot of big businesses here, Starbucks and Microsoft. Do they want craft beer to be what Seattle's known for?
No.
Nope.
They don't. I honestly, the problem that I see is, and I don't want to distract the conversation from craft beer, but Seattle, this is the problem in Seattle. We're known for the Space Needle. you know, there's people in this town who resent the fact that we're known for the Seahawks or the Mariners. There's people who don't want Seattle known for anything. There's people in Seattle who just leave us alone and let us live in our little tiny village up here in Southeast Alaska. And, you know, let's go back to the way things were in the olden days and just stop all development and stop moving forward. And we're a very progressive city in a lot of ways, if you know what I'm talking about. But we're a very, very regressive city in a lot of ways too. There's these people who say, I love the fact that my property values are high, but I'm tired of all these people moving here from across the country. You can't have it both ways. So that's a problem that we have here in Seattle that's kind of bigger than craft beer. They don't want to be known for anything except the Space Needle, I swear. And it's kind of frustrating for a lot of people in a lot of different industries. But, you know, Washington State had a tourism board. The state of Washington, when money got tight, one of the first things they got rid of was the state's Visit Washington Bureau, or whatever it was called, and that leaves the city of Seattle, the city of Westport, Washington, the county of Grant County in Eastern Washington to defend for themselves. They should understand that breweries, not only are they good businesses because they're small businesses, and craft breweries are an extremely inefficient machine. It takes a lot of people to make a keg of beer. Compared to making software, you can make $1 million worth of software on your couch with a laptop. You can't make $1 million worth of craft beer in your basement or, you know, your mom's house. Although there's some nano brewers that seem to be trying.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, so craft beer is a really important thing, and the amount of tourism that it does bring to Seattle is unrecognized. I mean, you guys know, people come into your places all the time. I was at Schooner Exact last week interviewing somebody, and while I was there for like an hour, 3 different groups of people came in that were visiting the city, and when I kind of asked them, what are you doing here? They're like, well, we're in Seattle. We got a day to do something in Seattle, so we're going out touring breweries. What else would we do in Seattle? Right. And there's nobody in the city. I honestly don't believe there's anybody that works for the city or that is an elected official in the city that knows that or cares.
And that's
it drives me nuts.
And that's a trend across the country.
So to kind of put that in perspective, this last year, while the state of Washington was trying to quadruple our excise tax to the highest in the nation, our neighbors down south passed a little bill that elected yeast as the state microbe.
Literally at the same time.
At the same time. So does that give you a perspective on the different states and how they recognize craft brewers? Yeah. I think that kind of sums it up right there. Washington couldn't care. They want to keep Boeing here, even though Boeing's leaving, and preserving the tax breaks they give to Boeing. We're paying full rate on our B&O taxes, and you know, people listening to other people complain about that. We pay full rate on that, and then we pay excise taxes on top of it, and they're wanting to quadruple those. And I know that was in some of the notes here too. What would that have done to the state? I mean, you know, honestly, we're kind of thinking about, well, geez, you know, we got beer going up to Canada now. You know, we got distribution in Oregon. What if we just brew here and pull out of the state? Let's just not sell any beer here. I mean, we're at a level in our brewery where, yeah, we sell a lot of beer here, but, you know, with a concerted effort, we could push it all out of state. Fine.
So thankfully for you guys as business owners, the excise tax rate, you know, did not get bumped up. So big round of applause.
Thank you for everybody for helping fight that battle. Yeah.
But there are initiatives around the country and other cities to lower the excise tax rate on small brewers. And kind of to your point, here it was like almost an initiative not to raise it, but to keep it the same. You know, just don't raise it. You know, what are you guys going to do as a brewers guild or as all brewers, you know, together to maybe push for some tax breaks or some easier laws to help you guys run your businesses?
For me, it comes down to because the city of Seattle is indifferent to us and in many ways unaware of us until we get to a certain size, and they want to add permits that we have to get. One of the things I'm doing is I have some template letters that I give my regulars that I've written or one of my guys has written that I then mail to legislators. There's certain laws that exist that I want changed. One of them that I helped work on getting changed was so that I could pour other Washington beer at tap houses. With a microbrewery license, I can have a quarter of my handles be other Washington beer. Okay, well I want to support my local cideries, who are technically wineries on paper, but their product is 6% alcohol that comes through a handle, same thing as a beer. Why can't I pour their beer here? So one of the things that I'm working on is sending letters to the legislators over and over, and phone calls and emails, just trying to get on the radar to begin the conversation at a larger level.
Are they responsive?
I get a lot of standard notes back. Every now and then I get a personalized one back, but it's a lot of just standard, yep, thanks for the letter, thanks for taking the time, we'll consider. So it's slow. It's a slow way to do things, right? And it's a way to do it with no budget. Like I don't have a lot of money that I can throw at something like that. But it's democracy in its kind of truest form, which I can appreciate. I think it'll take 6 months to a year to really get kind of a gale force behind us to get on the radar, to be like, hey, we need some laws that are changed, and here's what we need changed. These 5 things would be phenomenal.
Are there any initiatives as a collective group from a Washington Brewers Guild or a Seattle Brewers Guild, if there is one, to help advocate for some of these policy changes?
Well, I mean, I think everybody here is familiar with the Washington Brewers Guild, and we have worked in the past to do a lot of things together like that. The whole allowing breweries to pour Washington wines or ciders. It's the same thing, and that's been talked about, and that's been brought up, and that's something I think that we might work on the next legislative session. We had a few other things on our plate this year, so we do have some pretty decent laws in the state that allow us to be where we are, and I tell a lot of people, Washington State is not a great place to start a business. It's a great place to start a brewery. There's some good laws here for breweries, but it's probably not the best state for a business. And you'll hear that over and over again in the business world of like, wow, Washington's really sort of anti-business.
So what's stopping you from going elsewhere? Like you said, keeping your business here but sending your beer everywhere but Washington. What's stopping you from just picking up your business and setting it down in Oregon or anywhere else?
My wife is from here, my family lives here, my relatives are here. I'm not going anywhere. Can't go anywhere. This is where I'm going to be.
So then you got to change things.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Well, I don't want to speak for these guys, but other breweries from across the nation are flooding our market. There's no shortage of people to drink craft beer here. You could go open your business in Billings, where you're from,
and ship my beer out here to Washington.
And ship your beer to Washington.
There we go.
So there are people to drink it.
Right.
The amount of beer that we drink here in Washington is phenomenal. I mean, we drink, 1 million barrels of craft beer a year in Washington State, and you guys only brew a third of it. 2/3 of the beer that gets consumed, craft beer that gets consumed here, is from out of state. And this is a great place. It's a horrible place from a business standpoint. We do, like you say, there are laws, and one of the reasons why craft beer flourished here, going back to the 80s and 90s, was because of some of the favorable laws that we have that allowed people to open a brewery like this and have a tasting room, to open a brew pub and also sell their beer through distributors and such. We had favorable laws. We have some favorable laws for craft breweries. But the most important thing is we have people, especially here in the Puget Sound area, that are incredibly thirsty for craft beer. And there's a market for your beer. So, go open your brewery in Billings and ship it to Washington.
Well, there we go.
So speaking of the market opportunity for craft beer, what are some of the unique retail opportunities that exist in this market that you guys are noticing? It could be sporting venues or getting it on airplanes. Is there something specific to Seattle? Do they pour craft beer at the top of the Space Needle? I mean,
I do.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, Pike up there.
So what are some of the retail opportunities that you think are not necessarily untapped but need to be explored more for craft brewers?
One of the laws that got passed recently, I think within the last year or two, was allowing certain types of licenses to fill growlers. I think they changed it so if you have hard liquor, you can't fill growlers, but if you have everything else, you can. That may have changed even more. So the state of Washington, and particularly in Seattle, does a lot of growler fills. A lot of growler fills. And even me, I have 22-ounce bottles, 6 packs of cans to go. There's people who won't drink beer out of a can. They would rather get that growler and take it to their buddy's house and split it with him and their buddy on the back porch. They don't want a 6-pack of cans. They love that growler. They've had that growler for 3 years. They bring it with them wherever they go. They fill it 4 times a week. It's holy to them. Yeah. And so there's a lot of bars that are starting to get into the growler thing, and it's a volume game. So instead of that's 4 pints of beer, right? So if we can start to move more volume through these places where they have a pint of my Evo IPA on tap and then go home with 4 pints of it, boom, I just sold 4 pints out of my keg. So I'm going to move more volume through that same account.
So really exploring the opportunities to pour more draft beer in growler form.
Yeah.
And I think that growler business is just huge.
Yeah.
You look at like Chuck's Hop Shop, a place that up in North Seattle, and he's doing an amazing business. It's what we heard earlier. It's the convenience store that's turned into a growler filling station.
Right.
And it's true. There will be a 7-Eleven that will put in a growler filling station. It's months away, as I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does the Bartels with growlers?
Yeah.
Awesome.
A Bartels that's filling growlers.
A Bartels filling growlers. I love it.
Yeah. That's cool.
It's a pharmacy, right?
That's cool.
And I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but since we're talking about growlers, I know there's always sort of the constant debate of the quality and the freshness in a growler. When you first get it, sure. But once it leaves, the retailer's hands or even your guys' hands, you can't really control it as well as even a bottle per se, or limiting the quantity. I mean, you're putting 64 ounces of liquid into a glass container. Where do you guys stand in terms of the quality of beer that gets put into a growler? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? Obviously, it's a great retail opportunity, a great selling opportunity. But as far as a platform for showcasing your product, where do you guys fall?
I think it's a great way to get your beer out there and for people to get more of your beer and take it home and go to parties and things like that. As far as showcasing the product, I mean, I've seen reviews of our draft-only beers that somebody did who lives in like Louisiana. How did they get, and they're claiming they poured it from a bottle. How did that happen? Probably wasn't the best, place to drink our beer. So, that kind of stuff is, I'd much rather have somebody send a can down there. But yeah, people do odd things, and after it leaves your brewery, there's not a whole lot you can do with it.
Yeah, we make sure we educate people. Short-term consumption, day or two, drink it. Once you crack it, treat it like a 2-liter of pop. It's going to go flat. So just don't put it in the sun, don't put it in your car. Just take it to where you're going and drink it.
Is it hard to convey that message at some of these retail accounts where you're not there every day? I mean, selling a growler over the bar, you can do that, no problem. But at a 7-Eleven, you might not have that opportunity if it arises.
Yeah, that's a lot of education that has to happen, and that takes time.
I think they'll figure it out pretty quick if they, have a pint one night and come back the next night and boy, this isn't quite as carbonated as it was.
Yeah.
I think you can educate yourself fairly quickly and learn that, oh boy, if I leave this much beer in the bottom of it, it's probably not going to be good tomorrow.
From a consumer standpoint, I think that you're selling me short as a consumer. I understand. If I take a growler home of your beer and something's off, I'm not going to blame it on the brewery. It's a growler. It's not a perfect vessel. It's not a perfect vessel. And I think that if you worry too much about the cleanliness of that growler or how I treat the growler when I leave your brewery, that's a valid concern. But you should maybe be more concerned about the accounts that you're delivering beer to that haven't cleaned their beer lines in 9 months.
Yeah.
That's more of an issue. So if you're getting a growler filled at a bar where they haven't cleaned the beer lines in 6 months, is it the growler's fault, or is it the beer's fault, or is it the draft line's fault?
So we've hit on a lot of different points here, and one of the things that we haven't touched on is some of the culture of craft beer here. In a lot of towns that we visit, especially even on this trip, I mean, we're going to Portland tomorrow, but we've been in San Diego and LA as well. And even just walking around and you compare San Diego to LA, the culture is different. And it could be a geography thing, it could be a population thing. Obviously, 2 completely different markets, separated by only 2 hours of driving. But definitely the culture varies from market to market. What's the culture like for craft beer here? You guys sort of touched on it a little. A lot of people coming into Seattle, moving here, maybe not completely tied to their local brand, but maybe touch on some of the cultural aspects of craft beer in Seattle.
Seattle is, to compare Seattle to Portland directly is a bit apples to oranges based on size. There can be some comparisons, but it shouldn't be unilateral, because Portland's so much more compact. You can hit up 30 breweries on a pedal bike, whereas in Seattle, that'd be a little harder to do.
Hey, Ballard's almost there.
What?
Hey, Ballard's almost there.
Ballard's almost there. They'll be there in like, 3 months?
I guess something like that.
Another 12 breweries opening in the next 6 months.
Like I said earlier, one of the things I always go back to is Seattleites love good beer, whereas Portlandians love Portland beer. They love Oregon beer. Their slogan is SNOB, support native Oregon beer. And so you walk down, I was down at OBF earlier this week, and those SNOB shirts are everywhere. And I'm walking around with a Seattle Washington shirt on, feeling like the little guy, like, oh, I don't quite belong here. And there is a bit of a one-way street, where Seattle is open and accepting of pretty much anything that's good, whereas other close-knit communities, even my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and like Asheville, North Carolina, and Chicago, they've somehow taken on this stance that the beer from my city is the best, no questions asked. Seattle doesn't have that. We have good beer trumps all, is kind of our general mentality.
I think part of it is, we sometimes get too focused in on what's going on in craft beer and don't look outside of ourselves a little bit. But everything that we're describing about Seattle is, you're right. We don't have that my beer, our beer is the best beer attitude as much as some other places do. But what we do have is Amazon and Google and Microsoft and that huge biotechnology industry that's booming in South Lake Union. It's bringing in people not only from across the country, not only from Grand Rapids and from Texas and from Georgia and Carolina. It's bringing in people from India and Taiwan and China and all over the place. And a lot of people are moving to Seattle that not only are they not craft beer drinkers, they're maybe not beer drinkers at all. And it's an opportunity for us to educate them and bring them around. But in Seattle, the major growth spurts that are happening are maybe not, it'd be great if we had 60,000 people move to the city next year that came from Portland, we'd have 60,000 more craft beer drinkers. But we have 60,000 people coming from other places where they don't maybe drink as much beer or any beer. So, it's a little bit challenging, but, I'm not going to complain about the fact that we have such a booming tech community here.
And you took that actually a little different way than I would have expected. Tremendous opportunity to educate those folks on craft beer, but also it seems like a tremendous opportunity to tap them as a potential resource for creative ingredients, or maybe they do actually bring some knowledge from a different city in the U.S. of how craft beer is there. How much of that plays into it? There's got to be an element of being able to rely on them as a resource in a way.
That's interesting. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, it's a good point.
It's a really good point. I haven't thought about that.
Well, not just other places in the U.S., but other countries as well.
Yeah.
What are the cultures there around beer or whatever their alcohol is or non-alcohol is? What sort of a thing can you learn from that and take away from that?
There's several breweries making kombucha now in Seattle.
Kombucha.
And they actually have, funny, even though it's like only 0.5% alcohol, they have to get licensed as craft breweries. There's microbreweries in the state.
And there's a brewery that uses exclusively sake yeast. He doesn't even use brewer's yeast, he uses sake yeast for his beers. He has since transitioned from that because he got a bit of pushback, but for the first 3 years he was around, he just used sake yeast.
Well, it's been some great discussion tonight. I want to end with one final question for each of you, and we'll start with Ryan. What is going to be sort of, if you had to pick one or two things that you as a small brewery business owner can do to help grow the overall share of craft beer in the Seattle area, what's gonna be that one thing that's really going to help drive craft beer here?
From my point of view, I think it's going to be making beer more accessible. Maybe not an IPA. Things that somebody who drinks a lot of Bud Light can pick up and go, oh, hey, this is pretty good. A gateway beer. Again, making it accessible. Cans. Take it out in the woods with you. Take it onto the boat with you. It's not glass. It's not a growler. It's not going to break.
Have you done any of this for your business, or?
We took kind of an opposite tack on it. So we're all about the off-premise sales and cans. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, how we can help that and what we can do with that.
Kendall, from your point of view, how can small brewery business owners help grow the overall share of craft in Seattle?
I think they could. I think honestly, well, first of all, they could all grow, and I know that's a lot easier said than done. But they could all grow and brew more beer, so they could send more beer to the market. But also, I think a lot of them could do a better job on social media and maybe kind of promote themselves a little bit better. And that's not a knock on anybody for how well they are or are not doing it. I'm just saying that is one way they could do it. And I think that at some point, it's not their business. You guys' business is to make beer. It's my business, honestly, it's my business to promote it. And it's the city's business to promote it as an industry, as a local industry. And at this point, I think there's a growth thing that needs to happen at the same time that we do this. And we'll never be as provincial as they are in Oregon. Tell my brothers down in Oregon that tomorrow. They are fiercely provincial in Oregon, and it's way beyond just craft beer. That's just the way they are in Oregon, and we love them for it. But we'll never be that way here. So we have to find other ways, and I think that as long as we keep our breweries growing, making more beer so we can provide more beer to the market, do a better job of, the Washington Beer Commission is trying to do a good job of making sure people know what beers on the shelf or what beers at the bar are Washington beers. I think there is a little bit of that. People go into a bar and they don't know where Hilliard's is at.
Right.
Unless they read my blog every day, which everybody should.
Oh,
they don't know where Hilliard's is at. They don't know where Two Beers is at. So educating people so that we can easily identify what beers are local. I think that's important, and I just think getting the word out there and continuing to tell those younger people who are growing up as craft beer consumers that drinking local is a good thing.
So
Joel,
I want to butt in here a little bit on the comment of local and just point out that Seattle is 173 miles from Portland and that Bend is 163 miles from Portland. Thank you.
That's like when I say drink Washington beer, and I'm talking, and Portland's half the distance of Spokane, but I still feel like if I want to drink Washington beer, I should drink a Spokane beer.
Totally. Yeah.
Drink local? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Joel, how is Joel from Two Beers going to grow the overall market share for craft in Seattle?
So one of the things that I appreciate the most about the craft beer industry in Washington State, that I think is true industry-wide, but it's particularly true in Washington, is Washington breweries collaborate a lot, but we do it all behind the scenes. So we do it all on the back end of things. We share ingredients, we share yeast, we help each other out if something breaks, we share resources. One of the things I think I would love to do is kind of what actually Hilliard's just did with Red Hook, which made a Washington collaboration beer with two Washington breweries. You see a lot of collaboration beers becoming popular within the market, but a lot of times it's a Washington brewery with a Colorado brewery, or it's a Washington brewery with a California brewery. What if 3, 4, 5 Washington breweries got together, all kind of took the same grain bill, the same malt bill, brewed basically the same beer in-house, showcased it at a bunch of places around the city, and showed the nuances of each breweries. And so that would become bringing all of Washington beer, kind of all boats rise mentality, where we have 4 or 5 breweries all get involved to make an amazing beer, where I think that would be awesome.
And that certainly opens up the door to Kendall's point for more social media promotion and
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's make it happen, guys.
do it.
Talk to me about it.
Well, there's a few brewers in the audience, so if anyone wants to join in a collaborative effort, talk to these guys.
I'm all for it. All for it.
I'll promote it.
Awesome. Now, I don't know if anyone has a question out there, but I can turn the mic over. John from Tap Handles has a question here.
Yeah, so this is a great segue. You guys were talking about a lot of ambitious projects, and I'm wondering from a brewer standpoint and also from a consumer standpoint, how much of your time is spent when thinking about the business, about the brand aspect and the visual aspect, especially in packaging? How much of your time is devoted to that, and do you think it needs to be more or less, or what are your thoughts in general?
A lot of our time is dedicated, like most of it. We come up with stupid ideas all the time, and we will sit and debate. We have a tap handle. We're trying to figure out new tap handles, and boy, we just get deadlocked on like, how do we make this look good and still make it affordable for us to do? And you know, there's kind of a trade-off between, a lot of times, between looking good and what you can afford to do. And boy, yeah, we spend way too much time, I think,
Yeah, there's an
debating what we look like.
I stand by kind of the belief of, I don't make beer unless I sell beer. So it has to sell, otherwise my brew house sits empty. And so I spend I often joke that making beer is one of the easiest things I do and takes the least amount of time. Everything else goes into running a brewery besides making beer.
The looking good and having something on the shelf that looks good, that's what entices somebody to buy the beer the first time, and that's the hardest sale. Now the brewers, we have to make sure that we have really good beer in there so that somebody buys again. But you know, you can't shortchange one for the other.
And that's actually a nice segue to a question we received on Twitter. How can a distributor ensure that the beer from a brewery tastes just as great at the bar or on the shelf as it does from the source, you know, right over here in the tap room? Joel?
Oh man, good question. There's no easy answer to that question because there's so much that goes into it. A lot of it is inventory control, first in, first out, FIFO systems, making sure that you keep good inventories, small inventories, no longer than maybe 2 weeks on your floor. Keep it cold, huge deal. There are graphs out there that Sierra Nevada has done a lot of amazing work determining the life of their beer kept warm compared to cold. And their IPA goes from something they say is good to something that they would not certify as quality within about 2 weeks of being warm. And so keeping beer cold is just so key. It's above and beyond anything else. And then tap lines. Kendall mentioned tap lines. State of Washington right now doesn't regulate tap lines. There's talk of it happening, but keeping tap lines clean is vitally important for quality of beer.
There's not talk of it happening, it's happening.
It's happening.
Being enforced.
Yeah.
Right. One question over here, and
you guys talked earlier about.
Does the speaker have a feedback?
Too far away.
So you guys talked earlier about maybe the state not supporting breweries like we wish they would. With almost 190 breweries in the state, I don't know what the number is now, how do we, little breweries, support bigger breweries and bigger breweries? How do we collaborate better together so that we can turn the tide on that a little bit? Is there a way for us to just get together more as a group or coordinate together more? I mean, have you guys thought about that, how to engender that kind of cooperation and work together? I don't know, it seems like there's so much power behind the numbers that are here in the state.
I think that's a big thing. I see a lot of support for breweries on the legislative level. I don't see a lot of support for breweries on the regulatory level. You know, the people up high that we elect, you know, maybe they're just, you know, glad-handing, but they seem to really get it and know that, you know, we are, you know, engines of growth in the economy, and we employ people, and, you know, we turn that back into the economy. You know, the guy coming in to, you know, enforce things and enforce code and things like that, don't, you know, they're going to take their interpretation of it and don't really care how that affects you. And great, you're part of my job, I'm going on. And aren't really willing to work with breweries the way that I think our legislators are. And I think breweries could do better to band together and you know, talk to our legislators and do it from the top down, and help our legislators create some laws that, you know, make it easier or make it clearer for those regulating us what's okay and what's not, and how to move forward on that.
Yeah, and then the opposite of top down obviously would be bottom up, and so then how do we? There's a very large opportunity for brewers to unite, to even like hand sign a law that we want changed. I think as brewers, we almost rely too much on the guild and the commission to get stuff done for us on our behalf because we have one. What if we didn't have one and we as brewers had to unite on our own grassroots movement to make change happen? Maybe more change would happen, I don't know. But it's something we push back on the guild and the commission quite a bit to say, hey, can you do this, what about this? And that's a very slow process because it's like 3 or 4 people that do it. But if 190 people all signed a piece of paper, every brewery owner, every brewery founder signed a piece of paper, it went down to Olympia, we may see change happen a little bit faster.
Yeah, there's a brewery in every legislative district in the state.
which is that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big state with a lot of legislative districts. I was going to say, that was Cincinnati from Strong Arm Brewing. Kind of to approach your question, what you said about collaboration is, I think one thing from a consumer standpoint, one of the things that I see in my fellow consumers that drives me nuts is this idea of big is bad and small is good. We have to lose that. We have to lose that. I know the brewers don't necessarily have that attitude, but the consumers, we need to teach the consumers not to hold that way, because you guys just did a collaborative beer with Red Hook. Red Hook makes a lot more beer than you guys do.
A little bit.
But it's great that you did that. So I just think that we need to stay open to the idea, because at some point every brewery is too big. I mean, and where do what are you going to be, a femto brewery? Like, I don't want to drink beer unless it's made 1 pint at a time. I mean, at some point, consumers need to get over that, and we need to allow breweries like yours to collaborate with some larger breweries to help you get traction, to help maybe let that other brewery
regain some of its cachet.
Yes, exactly, to let them keep themselves young and fresh and current by collaborating with you. And I think there's lots of room for that. One of the things is, I hate to see I'm an industry outsider. As an insider, I'm an outsider. What I hate to see is new breweries come into the market and they're invisible. Get involved. There's a guild. Pay the $250 a year or whatever it is and be a member of the guild. Go to the meetings. Get engaged. I know if you're in Eastern Washington, it's a long way over to where they usually have the guild meetings and things like that, but get engaged in the community. Don't just open your brewery and then become a little invisible entity over there in some small town.
The guild has talked a lot, the Brewers Guild here has talked a lot about opening up our meetings a lot better from a technology standpoint, and being able to attend a meeting over an internet chat, things like that. And so we are conscious of the difficulty of attending meetings, and I know a lot of times it seems like we're the Seattle Brewers Guild and not the Washington Brewers Guild, but we're hopefully rolling out a few things in the future here to help bring everybody together that might not be able to drive as far.
But to our brewing brothers and sisters in Eastern Washington, I want to say it's a lot easier for 4 or 5 of you to come to Seattle than it is for 75 or 80 of us to go there.
And they just started a guild in Spokane, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. And Washington Brewers Guild is meeting in Spokane next, so there you go.
Oh, there you go. That, I'm sure it has nothing, that they don't relate at all. Well, thank you guys. That was very insightful. How about a big round of applause for these guys? Big shout out to Joel at Two Beers for hosting us, obviously.
Thank you.
Please buy some pints over at the tap room after this and stay and network a little bit. And I did want to take a brief moment to call out some of our sponsors listed on the big obtrusive sign over here that is in front of you. They allow this whole thing to be free. So Crown Packaging, they make all the cans for Joel, and Brian is back there.
They make them for Hilliard's too.
And Hilliard's.
Yep.
JV Northwest, Wild Goose Canning, and IDD Process and Packaging. They've sort of enabled this trip to happen, so thank you guys. And yeah, let's go have a beer.
Thanks, everybody.